There are proofs that every single nation, every modern nation, fell as Oz, were only realized as Oz in relationship to the nature of organized crime with the sciences that themselves aren't led to understand it. There are proofs that is a method that set up nations to be wrongdoers in relationship to a nature of organized crime that they were never let with education to let legal natures not already self-defending lies as evidence fabrication natures, as her conviction natures, as a delusion propagation nature, breaching nature, evidence fabrication roles to all areas and how the method is by how is with interscience treatment obfuscations of proper facts treatments. So it forces nation sharing natures of dictates in relationship to power, and what really causes it to be used as top down lies and delusions to force finite facts mistreated, enforced lies and delusions in their place, in other words, in evidence fabrication natures in relationship to the justifications of it. For example, with American history, summary convictions regarding the nature of organized crime of terror on our founders, and regarding forced glorifications of pilgrims and of natures of organized crime before that. In the American Revolution, this caused people in England to applaud. Why? Because there was a nature of internation science. Legal natures only let realized tool evidence fabrication natures of a breaching organized crime method. This is demonstrably what religions are about. We inherited sciences that were criminally re-engineered to perpetually exploit ancient revelations. There are proofs that the ancients had more capable understandings of organized crime, which criminal enterprises are, but they are that together, and they are with criminally legalized criminal enterprises, per natures of organized crime. That not one nation's legal natures were, in other words, branches of government were let anyone, no one was let sophistication to do this. How? By having people only let realize trained to roles with as evidence fabrication, no, justifying top down lies and delusions, insulate, obfuscated, and lied about. This is not just in relationship to undisputable proofs of it with the treatments of American history and forced summary convictions attached to that into ancient history and how, because of the way um, distinctly defended nations are defending commonly defending and already invested needing to have supported lies and delusions in relationship to treatments of actual legal issues like Native American rights and about proper treatments of finite facts and correlations needs and the needs of ratiocination, which are the needs, which is the needs of truth to protect as the cause of evolution. Because everyone wants the same thing because we are the same space, nature, positive identity. Stayed here as value or forced as negative value nature in relationship to what will be the progress that unchanging positive will only be here or somewhere else. It doesn't mean to push us. We have to ignore the inherent value nature system longing of our species. But we do this because we're on ulterior from natural value nature system. This is why, for example, the Old Testament, the beginning of Genesis, and the beginning of the Old Testament has the tree of the life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is in relationship to, this is a method of knowing that sciences were going to maintain control. They already had control of internation science and of legal natures and of human judgment and human conviction natures, insidiously and multi-front in relationship to what no one understood, because that was with the methods of it. Having nations, modern nations, this was before modern nations were being, modern nations were being set up to be denatured and forced terror markets positions and the colonization's terror laws left not just unexplained, but with lies and delusions, forced as practical judgment. It's not. It's lies and delusions. So we have finite facts being forced entertained, not free speech, in other words, right under our noses. And politicians, each branch of government is only trained to sensibilities that are breach legal nature, linguistic tricks. In other words, that's not even debatable. That there was organized crime, acts, intercolony and interstate, in relationship to what it takes to understand what was interstate and what has been blaming it on another. And when those terror laws tactically, categorically were methodically to keep us playing fake sides that they made, blaming on ourselves, on every other thing, not having, with education's interscience roles, blaming on everything else, per their roles with that multi-front. In other words, there are no justifications for not letting truths spoke in relationship to such negative value nature progressions, and in relationship to the millions still being hurt by those original colonizations underlying terror tactics. This leaves nations with opinion natures of people with the streets of education only let predatory to the nature of the conversation that our leaders need to have with us. And because of the way, too, our nations were forced to share policing agreements, treatments of logic, and of stability, and of peace that are not that on every side. So every side has to lie about that, though, because they're forced to fight about, in other words, logic short of. In other words, if someone tries to start speaking about facts online, someone could be trying to speak about, this happens, finite facts. Even the software police are recorded roles, obfuscating that, and then just yelling out, being the ones with multi-front, pretending they have sensibility, they want peace online, but they're the ones making allegations against people, trying to speak proofs. They're spreading slanders against people, against using strangers online to cover up lie progressions. In other words, this is not just with our nation. This is with the nature of legal nature stewardships, being glorified, being told to feel good about themselves in ways that are breaching rules. Because we don't have the common identity being defended, because we don't have it understood and how. So the most important things growing up, I learned to understand were how insidiously legal nature justifications that were contradiction to the same principles they're trying to glorify to us at the same time, they're denied. And how there's orchestrated manipulations of innocence through the kids I grew up with, and how that related to their roles with this as an systemic interbranch evidence fabrication natures and problems through time. in relationship to terror acts recorded still on charge, and how relationship to exploitations with interlegal nature roles with live progressions they have to then progressively and actively insidiously hide because they never realize that investigation per them investigations were going to come back and how they're already invested with interbranch legal natures with exploitations of our areas in the position, in other words, positions in relationship to the things that are going to be asked about. They were going to be and are going to be asked about, God willing. In other words, everyone's, our nations, our leaderships, reaction natures. So, in other words, we have to be able to explain how we're being forced into where no one can speak because everyone is forcing hurt conviction nature justification because everyone's hurt. That's understood, and everyone wants justice. But everyone's going to getting pseudo justice because we have lies and delusions not only infused with logic, forced, but how that's being exploited because of the nature of logic that then ends up self-defending itself with commonly used means to lie about their roles with lie progressions and how that is exploited once in a while in relationship to serious things like 9/11, relationship to related witness fabrications with our legal natures, with different agencies with recorded roles, interests, needs to hide related lies, including using their family members, and in relationship to police forms and internal investigations and all, and interbranch roles being facilitated to need crime acts in the form of lies, threats. And then having to insidiously, offensively blame related illusions and justifications needed being in relationship to garbage, illusions being told to our chiefs. Since founding, we've had breached interscience, self-defense natures in relationship to natures of organized crime and of complex litigation juxtaposed with it, forced with everyone only let justified playing out the American business role. In other words, just because our founders began a method, they didn't colonization didn't just pack up its tier of laws that it had just for surface value. It didn't have just for that and go away. This is with the American Revolution was 1800 is easiest and right in the middle. We're not even done. It's starting, right? 1859, only 59 years later, the year before the Civil War. Like in dictionaries, most dictionaries give 1860 to 1865. I mean 1860 to 1865 for the years of the Civil War. This is in relationship to original terror, interscience, terror positions with terror laws to divide, with methods by them, not just surface laws. This wasn't prejudice that they had. This was intercultural police forcing, cultivating, theater forced only let realized. They could have just killed all the Native Americans because they forced them all to retreat. They totally denatured language. But what they want more than that was everyone to only let. First, they make everyone not remember education. We know in Europe their campuses were teaching that the world was flat, even though they knew it wasn't. I read that in a book. Some of my books got stolen, including one about what James Madison did with his what really makes him the founder of this nation, which is a method to counter extortion, which is what caused and what enabled the bravery and the counter theater, which was only still contained in relationship to the Boston Tea Party. That wasn't that was forced. That was forced bravery too. That wasn't just. In other words, everyone was tricked and forced against what was holding terror laws and methods, these sick methods. For all modern nations felt that this America last. That's why they leave out what they did to the Amazon women in relationship to the narratives between the difference between ancient Roman history and ancient Greek history. When we know that originally, there are proofs that originally internation science was of a nature that was beyond nations. It was wanted by them before criminally legalized inter-science re-engineering, criminal re-engineering of human education. First, after having tactically affected nations not to trust internation science anymore, understanding that they could still develop it, and then cause the entire species to stay contained per fax treatments, incapable of unhinging ourselves from breached value nature systems, evidence fabrication natures between nations in ways not understood, holding our top sophisticated natures to evidence fabrication natures. This is in relationship, the proofs of it are in relationship to how they've failed to explain the natures of organized crime, the methods with colonization's terror laws, for example, using color. We have to understand legal nature motivations for that. And her conviction nature, everyone's roles with this. This is what forgiveness is really about. Not to understand justice with physics first, because you have physical delusions. And it's evidence fabrication natures, reaction natures to what everyone missed. So, what it means is that our leaders, what it means, what we can do for our country, even though they still have stuff they haven't done for us. They haven't fully freed us all yet. Millions. Low logistical impositions with colonization, for example, not on these fronts, in relationship to pilgrims, in relationship to explaining the logistical theaters and terrors on our founders, all, including James Madison. They just left off Marbury versus Madison, which says something like, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police form, I'm not a criminal. It says something like, true justice must satisfy all appearances of true justice. It might say that exactly. What that means is that unchanging truth is unchanging always. See, but we have bent truth. In other words, if you say, just take someone's credibility as a fact, that's not an unchanging truth always. That's not letting free speech, especially when our leaders' truths are questioned. But see, this is only justified because the people who want to question if our leaders are telling lies or delusion or holding delusions in relationship to logic, they're holding it in relationship to the treatments of the facts. So then the person can't defend the line of logic without hurting back. In other words, because everyone else is still attached to only let realized standardized lies and delusions, only let self-defended with sensibilities. That's all people ever experienced. So before someone can make an argument, their free speech is cut off by lies and delusions. Top down being forced. Not free speech, not proper evidence treatments. For example, even in relationship to top-down phenomena, like with branches making taking positions against individuals with little things about Native Americans, the theme of that or whatever. While they take none against the economic positions, using these things. And then when they do that, they do it with the lies and delusion as evidence fabrication nature. So, for example, all a team needs, if a team has one Native American on their side, if they don't forget that man, and man is justified. But if a team has one Native American on their side, they should be allowed to, especially if they're helping the cause, because all it takes is one person. Because there's so many Native Americans, it's even not about money too. It's about nature, the nature of our relationship, not just to ourselves, but our environment. But our relationship to the environment is our relationship to nature, so that affects our nature, the relationship to ourselves. Internation science was affected to methods that knew that we would justify this, playing roles as evidence fabrication natures. In relation to invest into positions, even invested, relying upon progressions of environment, landscape denaturing. In California, they have homes. These are colonization standards worse in California. They had terror laws that wouldn't let their homes built any safer or any bigger or any differently in colonization. With their terror laws, they killed a whole family of people, even met to discuss doing it outside of terror database monitored conversations before they had computers even. That's how they have those laws, and they had people selling everyone tied to ways that if everyone stepped out of line, that was forced to stay life measured and roll in relationship to the hurt of the other types forced to interactions with each other. These are methods that are breaching methods that forced even tribes, Native Americans, to forget their original sophistication, their original education, because they weren't allowed the stability. They were taken to retreat natures, forced, to different value nature systems out of the denatured landscapes. They lost their food supplies. They have to start relying on the international mass market food systems and everything like that. UConn, a great school. They have the agricultural program, was fundamental with American history, but everyone was still a tool evidence, a tool breaching nature roles in relationship to natures of organized crime that our campus of the sciences weren't let realize. They weren't allowing ratiocination because of the way terror positions were still entrenched from colonization, which were methods below surface colonization in the wars of it. In other words, that's why the people in England cheered us in revolution, because it wasn't, we shared natures of internation science extortion, internation prison extortion, the same beast. Extortion of our leaders, extortion of kings and queens, it's just like the extortion of our leaders, same methods. It's with the opinionators force challenging our leaders, but leaving out the nature of the complex litigation and positions with language, where they don't have free speech in relationship to forced shared markets position, and they're originally terror shared. For example, in Connecticut winters, how could a Native American survive in a tent? They had to be underground, And we started with breach legal neg. This is why interscience crime we're not charged with not letting women vote, even into the 20th century. Terror laws against people's color of skin. These were originally and were stayed terror positions and methods. In other words, legal nature linguistic terror tricks, not free speech. And still not free speech by still the terror entrenchments that our founders really wanted us to have the bravery to respond to in writing. And no, Jesus was born in the wake of the death, the murder of Julius Caesar, state murder of him, internation murder of him, in relationship to already captive human education. So note they slandered both of them. Just because you glorify someone's name doesn't mean, you know, the Quran warns people are going to be say they're Muslim always. The Quran knows that human education is already breached. So there's a method we hear in relationship to her conviction nature's bottom up, being forced top down too at the same time for the nature of the relationship of the self-defense of nations, modern nations forced only let realize to defend themselves this way. The Quran is about this. It is demonstrably, in other words, it's about criminal re-engineering of human education that caused al-Jahiliyyah. And Sharia law is not what our legal natures, internation, note the same ones that directed us with the terror methods, the roads with that, because they were only let realize to that too, per human education with that. In other words, al-Jahiliyyah is in relationship to what Sharia law is. And I'm not even an expert on it. But there are proofs that we can observe that all sides are attaching convictions, taking the Quran out of sequence, and doing what it warns against, using scholarship and not the Quran itself, and not real life in relationship to real life facts. In other words, about pantheism, because al-Jahiliyyah, the greatest part of that was pantheism. And demonstrably, pantheism was criminally re-engineered. It wasn't a multi-god religion. This is with criminal insidiousness narratives that were with long-term evidence fabrication methods to put these narratives about claiming that pantheism was about many gods. There are proofs that the Campus Martius was originally internation science that used science to reveal proof that there is only one God. But they put science as value before metaphysics, and before what comes, which is religions. Religion is about the unchanging, only on space nature's only unchanging positive. The nature of positive above our heads, below our feet, and horizontally, all ways, beyond us, overall, is unchanging, beyond our control. With our control, it is a radical, as a correlation nature in relationship to how unchanging positive demonstrates positive or negative value nature progressions in relationship to if we are unchanging positives actual nature or not. There are proofs that the religions are directing us to realize between our own physical lies and delusions only let realized justified, to see them with correlation, and to correlate and understand what is actively in demonstration to us, inherent to everything. Space nature has one unchanging definition of the only unchanging value. All other values are in demonstration of this. So there are two natures of value. In temporary value nature, This is three ways. So there's three ways. We'll examine this with 30 minutes. The most important thing to understand is that we all have the same enemy, and it's not one nation. It's with human indifference to this, and what's really with our prisons, and with our areas left exploited, called poverty, concept containment. And free speech does not let top to bottom, bottom down. Even little kids can correlate lies with American history and how insidiously they're justified there. Insidiously. Criminal insidiousness is caused by criminal enterprises. Wrongdoers are caused by criminal enterprises. Human education, interscience was criminally re-engineered, legalized, to only let it realized, glorified, and entertained this way. And then with language, only let realized trained, only let realized. And then that being self-defense natures like that, in other words, roles in relationship to what is indefensible by actual justice, then glorifying that. How the tool, the evidence, in other words, our most sophisticated state tool, evidence fabrication nature. We must see through, we must peer to where we are not, eyes are not, are known, not looking with our stewards, and with, especially with the, in the natures of other international conjunctions, like with medicine, and like with psychology, with courts, and with, courts of the world share worse than incompetence, criminal incompetence, with every issue ever had. And for example, in relationship to this, in relationship to facts, treatments, in relationship to treatments of little people, in relationship to their feelings too. These positions with industry, with these legal natures, these are the motivations for the really makes the people assaulting comments to others. And when people have to counter fraud, fraud passions, fraud justice positions, that's not like countered, because we have offensive evidence fabrication natures in mass, so no one can, the finite is still ignored, especially with critical areas in relationship to actual space value nature areas being exploited, like poverty in our urban context, and how we were denatured, tactically knowing we were gonna have only let realized evidence fabrication nature, reaching nature, function, roles, reactions with our stewards, and with our streets, and with our human education used to facilitate breaching lie progressions blamed on all else, methodically. It's very important that we understand how, not just why our nation's original terror, subjugations are forced, blamed on individual hates and passions. When interscience caused that, interscience, organized crime, with multi-front with the sciences. For example, we're going to examine how they used until today Darwin's theory of evolution in relationship to just nonsense with the sciences, worse than nonsense, breach sciences, organized crime, natures of organized crime with sciences that maintain people to the defense of roles with evidence for systemic evidence fabrication natures and justifications of breach standards and of positions obfuscating proofs of it actively in relationship to each urban area in each suburban area distinctly but from the same ends. In great part, we need to charge known crime acts through unknown but uncharged predicate acts with psychology, with roles, internation, with prisons too through time, and with motivations with these parties and with these candidates chasing opinion natures only let breach. You don't have teach. So we have to not blame names to start going for facts. And when people take hard positions, we need to let them finish. You know, because maybe they're right. You know, but don't let them. About some things too. We can't have legal nature frauds. We're involved with such hurt things of innocence, and then having them pretending they have the justification to be with lies and delusions, pretending they have the credibility to be standing for that, even the capacity. Our education failed, and not by accident. In internation, every nation. We need to understand why they cheered us with the American Revolution in England. And kings and queens, they didn't have free speech. We have to understand our enemy is not a person. It's a facts treatment, reaction nature, glorification nature of facts treatment natures like that, stewardships, nonsense, concepts, types told to be. There's one type is human. And the reason they also let down our military too, the sciences. They also let down all our service people, but they don't understand that everyone's just indifferent. That's the way it's always been. So everyone says that's just thing, you can't change things, because we don't admit that. If you can't admit things, you can't change them. And when you don't admit them and replace them with lies and delusions to justify them, to say they're other, that's worse. And when that's being used, because that wasn't set up to be used, those reactions to lies being covered up, lie progressions, self-defense natures in relationship. There's no justification of the summary convictions with American history, with American standards, in relationship to millions, and in relationship to the ones that don't even want to admit it. Because we don't have proper facts treatments let. We have finite force not seen, not let. This is what religions are about. Criminal internation sciences. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police form, I'm not a criminal. God help us. Nations, we can only do it together. We have to admit we have no enemy. And we have to admit forgiveness this means. In other words, everyone got it wrong, not by accident. Everyone's invested wrong, not by accident. We all want the same thing, the same paradise. Why pray for garden? Not for little plot in colonization, pathology let play. Garden all. What made all these species, these delicate species, have the place to live? Because there were three relationships. It's not just there's always a greater relationship, even when there's three. The Trinity is diffusing through. A greater Trinity is diffusing through matter. And then there's another Trinity, in other words, as our nature, and as the nature of the earth. But beyond it, and as it is a nature that is fuller. If we are within that range of that nature, not beyond its nature, its wanted course. If we are its wanted course, we are along to it, identity, progressively. And when we are not, we are along the way from it. This is value all. I call you all. We are one species. The game begun. There is one game, one positive. one high. Medicine will tell you many lies. Invested value nature systems are wrong. Not all of them, of course, the real doctors. These are needed. The ones with evidence fabrication roles and acts in nature. We must heave. We must admit for past and present roles in internation, how and why. Internation. It's not to go after the individuals, no. It's to deal with the acts and the facts. Because the more important is understanding the connections to everything. Understanding concept contained. It's killing us. We have to understand how and why we are correlation nature and its potentials, correlation. So, we must give the means to our government, our nations, make it our, make it own, make the landscape own itself, and this problem solved. Communism and capitalism are not defined by the surface value of our Constitution for a reason. These are not finite facts. These are guises with false sides to common ill, only let forsaken, and in relationship to staid, forsaken, negative value nature progressions and logistical impositions upon people with urban and even suburban logistical impositions, especially urban. Forget about it. The only way we can do this is admitting it. By admitting it, we can make all kinds of open up all kinds of potentials and just forget about it. That's how the means for paradise. That's what we wanted. Everyone prayed for. So why? Just right now is the time. It even rhymes. There is no stability with nations that say business holds these wars, and it has logic, while it forces colonization laws blamed on every other thing. In other words, it's terror methods. We understand these terror methods, these natures of organized crime. We don't have to be lawyers to understand that. We understand that color was put in the laws because it wanted to divide us. Not emotions did that, not prejudice. What made those things, what makes the hate, is inter-science conviction roles with conviction natures not shown, science not shown with proper facts, treatments, not shown the law. So they go after school bullying, they go after theater, they don't go after real defense of real truth. Because too many students tied to professionals with kids in the schools too, when I grew up, in relationship to uncharged crimes recorded, in relationship to systemic evidence fabrication methods, even using known fraud with systemic, murderously, with evidence fabrication roles with uses of these, having the police investigate themselves. This is not their fault. I'm not going after, I want to go after facts, treatments, because these are forced, shared policing natures and our top directors with failed lies and delusions in relationship to logistical impositions of a left, in relationship to leaving the organized crimes with those laws against people still being hurt by unexplained and enforced glorified telling lies and delusions, and how, because they don't have the words to explain what they glorify with our allied positions in relationship to other positions. We don't even know. We're just a negative value nature progression. Every single nation, there's not one that is right. We all lost through day and night.